Welcome back to another episode of Adventure News, a place where we talk the latest, the greatest, and sometimes the hated adventure and dual sport stories. And Kawasaki have just released the KLX 300, which is fantastic news for all us dual sporters. And of course that means comparisons with the Honda CRF 300L. And I've already woken up this morning to a few messages asking me, hey Solid, which of these two should I choose? So in this video, I'm going to go through everything that is the Kawasaki KLX 300, but I'm also going to go through a direct comparison with the upcoming Honda CRF 300L for all you guys wanting to know which one you should purchase. Let's talk about the specifications of the new KLX 300, and the big deal is the engines. So 290cc bore, so that's increased by 43cc, so that should see a healthy dose of power. On top of that, it's getting the same cam profile as the KLX 300R, which is Kawasaki's Gentleman Enduro. We're also getting a slight increase in the compression ratio as well compared to the 250S. So all three of those factors should see a fairly decent power increase over the 250S, which in my opinion is much needed. So the weight on the Kawasaki is also increased by a couple of kilos. I think we're at 138 kilos now, or 302 pounds, compared to the KLX 250S, which was 1 or 2 kilos lighter from memory. But it really isn't that much of a difference to make any significant changes to the riding experience on or off-road. The frame has had minor changes to it. It certainly hasn't seen the huge changes like we've seen on the Honda, but we do have a few tiny little tweaks here and there. Kawasaki haven't explained the reason for those tweaks, but they have stated that they have made those changes. KLX 300 has 0.2 degrees more rake. It also has its trail increased by 0.1 inches, and the wheelbase is also extended by 0.4 inches. So that's very, very minor adjustments. I'll be interested to see whether I'll be able to feel those changes at all. Having ridden the 250S, it really will be interesting whether such minor changes will make a difference to the riding experience. I doubt so. The other interesting fact that I did spot is the ground clearance on this bike. It is actually 1.4 inches lower than the outgoing model, and I'm not sure why. So Kawasaki are quoting the KLX 300 at 9.8 inches for its ground clearance. So that is a really strange thing to do. I'm hoping it's a typo, as I really wouldn't like to see a dual sport with that amount of ground clearance. For me personally, I'd like to see more like what the KLX 250S has, that around the 11 inches plus. That's why I love the WR so much. It had the best ground clearance of all three of the major 250 dual sports. So that's a bit weird. Hopefully it is a typo. That leads me into suspension, which looks like it's unchanged from the 250S other than the lack of ground clearance. So that's neither a good or a bad thing, that's a just fine thing. Now the 250S I think had the middle of the road suspension. It was better than the Honda, it wasn't as good as the WR. So having it on the 300 is fairly decent, as the adjustability on the 250S's suspension was pretty good and the suspension was more than adequate. So I'm happy to see that, though I would have liked to have seen some minor improvements, but hey, at least we're still getting some halfway decent suspension nonetheless. Apparently the radiators have had a little bit of a tweak as well and have been resized. Apparently the radiator fan has been tweaked to redirect the hot air as well, although it wasn't really something I noticed when I rode the KLX 250S myself, but at least, hey, they've made some little updates and changes there. The other thing we know about the 300 is the price in the US. Now this has been confirmed in the US and in Canada, but we haven't had confirmation on if this is going to be released in Australia yet, but I think it's a fairly sure bet considering it's released in America and Canada. So the price in America is $200 more than the current KLX 250S. So I think we can expect that the KLX 300 will be about $7,000 Australian, as the 250S is currently about $6,600. So I would expect that $7,000, maybe a bit more. So that's a fairly good asking price and fairly wallet friendly. The instrument cluster does get updated, so that's good to see. We do get a new instrument cluster with a little bit more information than the outgoing model. So this brings me to my final thoughts with the 300. I'm kind of sitting on the fence with which way to go here. On one hand, I'm really appreciative that Kawasaki have been able to keep the cost to the purchaser down on this bike, and it's only $200 more than the outgoing model, considering all the changes on the engine internally. And it also means that perhaps a lot of the accessories that fit the KLX 250S will also be direct bolt-ons to the 300. Now, don't quote me on that, but I suspect things like the bash plate, top racks should be able to fit directly onto the 300, which is kind of the silver lining on Kawasaki not really putting in as much effort as I thought they could in this KLX 300. So on the other hand, I would have liked to have seen them put more effort into the update. That is, more modern touches to the aesthetics like LED lights, bigger changes to the frame and to the plastics, some more tweaks to the suspension as well, perhaps use the KLX 300R suspension on this bike. They really had a chance to make this a real dirt weapon, but they didn't. So I'm a little disappointed there, as if they had have changed the aesthetics and the frame and all that, they would have been able to save some weight like Honda did. They also would have made a bike much closer to my Unicorn motorcycle. But the KLX 300 as it stands is certainly still tantalizing and will definitely be on the list of bikes I'll be testing for my next motorcycle. Let's discuss the obvious comparison between the CRF 300L and the KLX 300. I'm doing this because I got a few questions this morning as I woke up asking me which one of these should I buy. So for those of you who've asked this question, hopefully this will help you out, at least until we can get our butts in the seats of both of these bikes. There's a few obvious things to point out here. You should not be deciding on your next bike based on the spec sheets. You should go and test ride both of these bikes before making a decision. As in my experience riding bikes, you can look at all the specifications, but they can never tell you the sum of the parts. I've ridden some bikes where the specifications have really not been inspiring, but then I've hopped on the bike and there's just something about the way all the components come together that it just gives the bike a special X factor. And you really can't tell that from reading it off the internet. So I would encourage you to go and get your bums on both of these seats and go and take them for a test ride before making a decision. The second thing I would like to point out is get the bike that's actually available in your country. As of now, the CRF 300L has not been announced for the Western market. So for a lot of places in the world, you can only get the KLX 300. So that's an obvious choice right there. So given those two things I've pointed out, say you don't have an opportunity to go and test ride these bikes. The short answer to this is either. From a glance, they both look very closely matched to each other. So if you're a new rider, I don't think you can make a bad decision either way here. Given that you probably have no experience, either you've never ridden off-road, you've perhaps never ridden a motorcycle at all, or you're one of these guys or girls that are coming back into the sport after a long break. It's not really going to matter the differences between these bikes. It's going to be basically splitting hairs. They're both going to be fairly capable off-road and do everything the other bike can do. So they weigh roughly the same amount. I suspect they'll probably make identical amounts of power, although I think that will be a point of difference. I think the Honda will make its power a little higher up in the rev range, and I think the KLX will make its power a little lower in the rev range, as that was my experience with the KLX 250S. Had more of that tractor factor, although it didn't make as much power as the Honda. It was much more of a luggy, single cylinder kind of tractor factor motorcycle, whereas the Honda was a little more modern, a little higher revving compared to the KLX. So I think those characteristics will carry over. So if you prefer that low-end torque, perhaps the KLX. If you prefer that more peppy, revvier experience, the Honda might be the way to go. There's also the looks of it. If there was a gun to my head and I had to choose a bike based on the looks, the Honda looks way better in my opinion. It looks far more fresh. I like the LED lights, also more preferable to the red over the green, although I do like the camo look on the KLX. It's just looking a little old and tired now. So I think that's a detriment that Kawasaki didn't put the effort into nipping and tucking everything there. So if you're buying or voting with your heart and your eyeballs, the Honda gets my vote there. Suspension is another thing that needs to be pointed out. This won't matter if you're a new rider. It just does not matter. Both of these bikes will have capable suspension. But if you've been in the game for a while and you're wanting suspension that will get you through a season of riding before you update it or completely change it, I think the KLX is going to have the better suspension as it has more adjustability and you can just fine tune it better. The Honda 250L's suspension, while good for a first time rider, is not really that great for someone that's got experience. It's far too soft. So I think that the 300L will probably have the same problems. So the KLX, if you're wanting a bike with better suspension, that will probably be the way to go. The other thing that's probably minor, but I will point out, is that the KLX, given that it's not a big departure from the 250S, some of the accessories might fit on the 300. I say might as I haven't been able to confirm this, but given that the frames are so similar, they're almost identical, I expect that things like the bash plate and the top rack should be able to fit on the 250S. So that might be appealing to you as well, being able to buy a brand new bike and already have accessories available on the market. As I expect, if you snap up a Honda as soon as they reach the dealership floor, there won't be too many accessories available straight out of the gate. So keep that in mind as well. Other than that, I just would really want to point out how much of splitting hairs this is. These two bikes are going to be very evenly matched in my opinion, and it really is just going to be a fact of how close is one of these dealerships to you, which one will hold the better resale value, are they the same cost for insurance, all those kinds of things that you need to think about, which will have the accessory market rally behind them. In the past, it's been my experience that the accessory market is tailored more towards the Honda than the Kawasaki. It's harder to find some of the parts for the Kawasaki than it is the Honda. It's not impossible, but in the past it's been easier to find accessories for the Honda. So keep all these other things in your mind when you're buying one of these two bikes. So I could probably wax lyrical for hours on which of these two bikes you should choose, but I think it would probably be better if you are a new rider to head over to my getting into dual sport riding videos. Otherwise this video would blow out to a million hours, and we already know that I tend to ramble as it is. So thanks for sticking with me to the end, guys. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Also, to all you new subscribers out there, welcome aboard to my crazy little part of the internet. There's been a whole pile of you lately, so thank you for joining this channel. And until next time, guys, don't forget to stay shiny side up, and I'll see you in the next video. Catch you later.